The ceasefire between Israel and Iran is holding, but that's just as I speak, because we're all still suffering whiplash from what went on since the weekend, since the B-52s went over Iran. And to make sense of all this, we have a good friend of the show, Jim Jatras. Jim, how are you, sir? Former U.S. diplomat, GOP Senate Foreign Policy Advisor.
Gary, great to be with you.
Jim, just briefly, are you making sense of it all?
Well,
that's a possible question.
Well, the long and the short of it is that this whole ceasefire seems to be based on the claim from Washington that we have basically destroyed Iran's nuclear capabilities, which I think is at the very least quite questionable. The bigger question is if it looks like the ceasefire is going to hold for how long? For hours, for days, for weeks, maybe even months? Because
or even to the end of the show, what do you think?
Well, the fundamental question, the questions behind the conflict have not been resolved at all. And it's not just, of course, Iran's nuclear capability. It's the fact that the goal of Israel and, for that matter, the United States are stated to be regime change. And that hasn't been accomplished. Iran is still standing as a power that this has been a push to remove, and it hasn't happened. So I don't see how this can hold that long. I think right now, at best, we have a truce where both sides are rearming, preparing for another round. When that will be, I don't know. But the bottom line is, unfortunately, the United States is now combatant in this conflict.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. So now that we've gotten the overview, let's just drill down just a little bit. Let's go back to this morning at 7 o'clock this morning on the White House lawn. Trump came out and started to answer some questions.
I'm not happy that Israel's going out now. There was one rocket that I guess was fired overboard. It was after the time limit and it missed its target. And now Israel's going out. These guys got to calm down. It's ridiculous. I didn't like the fact that Israel unloaded right after we made the deal. They didn't have to unload. And I didn't like the fact that the retaliation was very strong. But in all fairness, Israel unloaded a lot. And now I hear Israel just went out because they felt it was violated by one rocket that didn't land anywhere. That's not what we want, I'll tell you. And I'm telling you, I'm not happy about that, Israel, either.
You know, Jim, I hear him talk like that, and I wonder, how close a string does Netanyahu have Trump on? What's your sense there?
You know, it's really hard to tell, Gary. I mean, you know, Trump is trying to talk in this kind of neutral tone, Iran this, Israel that, the same way he does with Russia, Ukraine, like somehow we're a neutral bystander here. And of course, that's not the case. Just as Ukraine is a proxy war by the United States against Russia, that the war against Iran is jointly an American and Israeli war. So the idea he can rhetorically say, oh, will you guys please calm down? I don't like it. I don't like it. It really doesn't matter what he likes or doesn't like. We're now involved in this thing. So, you know, he can put on this pretense, but it really doesn't get us much of anywhere.
You know, it's funny. Well, funny is not the word. He's almost trying to distance himself, remove himself, as if, kind of like you said, as if he's like an outside player, he's just on the bench, just watching the game being played, when that's not what is going on, at least not after this weekend.
No, exactly. And of course, you know, I think the bottom line is twofold. On one side, on the Israeli side, they've suffered a lot of damage. You know, usually when the Israelis fight a war, if it's in Lebanon or in Syria or in Gaza, where they're not suffering directly at home from military power. And we saw some of that from the Houthis, but this is much more devastating. And I don't, you know, Israel's a fairly small country. They've been hurt badly. They can't keep this up for long. It seems to me.
That's why I'm showing this. This is just from last night's missiles that were dropped on Beersheba.
Look at this.
Yeah,
exactly. Now, on the other side, the Iranians have to tread carefully as well. You know, again, their air defenses have been degraded. I don't know how badly. I'm sure the Russians are working hard to build those back up again. But when all's said and done, Iran's a much bigger, much more populous country. They can absorb a lot more punishment from the Israelis, but they have to also worry about the bottom line on the other side. When all is said and done, Israel and the United States have the ability to destroy Iran with nuclear weapons. We can't do that to the Russians without committing suicide, but we can do that to the Iranians if the Iranians push a little too hard. So they've got an incentive to be very measured about how they want to proceed, even if they perceive that they have an advantage.
You know, Jim, I guess it maybe has happened many times in history. I'm not as much of a student as I maybe need to be, but the whole idea that how they had sent their warnings, they being Iran, sent their warnings to let them know that bombs were going to be dropped, and right, yeah. Listen, you've been in the field for half your adult life. How unusual is that for that to occur, where one country is actually alerting them? Now, I know it happens occasionally, but tell me how often that does happen in general.
Well, we've seen that in the past. In fact, between the United States and Trump during his first administration with the Syrians, where there was a little bit back and forth, where they basically hit non-targets, basically empty ground near a target, just to make a point. We saw that a little bit with the Israelis and the Iranians in the past with some of their exchanges. So, but I don't know. It's a very common thing. Maybe that seems to indicate that, you know, maybe not necessarily a mutual assured destruction, nuclear balance of terror, but at some point you can send these little signals for limited goals. Right now, if there was a desire to reach a ceasefire, I could see where we had this little kabuki dance between Washington and Tehran that they carried on over the last, 48 hours or so. But that is, let's say, a very limited goal that both sides might have pursuing then for a sort of a brief stand down while they retool and figure out what their next options are.
Do you think that's Iran recognizing their place in the situation because of what you just described before, that they can be annihilated? So they're just proceeding very, very so cautiously.
I think that's right, and I think the flip side of that is that they also perceive that they have the advantage over the longer term, but they don't want to squander that advantage by pressing too hard with either the Israelis, the Americans. Obviously, they don't want to direct unrestricted conflict with the United States, and the United States having chosen, I think unwisely, to join the war on Israel's side, they realize now they're in the big league. They got to be careful. That's one reason, by the way, with as much devastation we're seeing in Israel now, this seems to be mostly with their older missile systems. They're saving the good stuff, so to speak, for us if it turns out that they need it. I think they'd rather not go down that road.
Yeah, Lord have mercy. I hear you. So Trump went on from what we just watched. Here's the next little part here that he spoke.
Well, we have to have Israel calm down because they went on a mission this morning. I got to get Israel to calm down now.
The sides accuse each other for violating the ceasefire. So
I think they both violated it. Yeah, I don't think I'm not sure they did it intentionally. They couldn't rein people back. I don't like the fact that Israel went out this morning at all, and I'm going to see if I can stop it.
Do you believe that Iran is still committed to peace?
Yeah, I do. They violated it, but Israel violated it too.
Are you questioning if Israel is committed?
Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I'd never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because the one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Do you understand that?
You know, Jim, so many people believe that Trump is on the puppet of Netanyahu, and you wonder at times like this where if Netanyahu's just going behind Trump's back doing whatever the heck he wants, whatever the hell he wants, and doing this, and now Trump's just had enough of it, because it's not often that he's responded quite that viciously in public.
Well, for the sake of America's school children, I'm glad your language is more, let's say, family friendly than the president's is. Look, I don't think the fact that Trump is directing some of his criticism against Israel changes the fact that the symbiosis between Washington and Jerusalem is like this. It is not so much that Trump is a puppet of Netanyahu, but rather that almost everybody in his administration, almost everybody in Washington are exactly on the same wavelength with Netanyahu and with Israel. Whether Trump's personal sympathies go quite that far or not is really irrelevant. I mean, he is in a position that he's in. where he has to perform. And again, he can direct some. I think a lot of this is also cosmetic. It's for political purposes to say, oh yeah, we're just a bystander here, when in fact we are committed allies with Israel, even though we don't have a formal alliance with Israel, and we are up to our eyeballs now in this war. And maybe he wants to find some way to disengage, or maybe this is simply part of a larger strategy that is still aimed at what he left on the table the other day: unconditional surrender, regime change, kill the Ayatollah. I mean, none of that has been retracted, and until that regime change is accomplished, Bibi Netanyahu is in a very, very difficult position, and I don't think Trump can afford to cross him, because he has a lot of other cards to play himself.
Yeah, and here's a little bit of color behind the scenes. This what we're going to hear is an Axios reporter who was reporting on a phone call that had occurred right before what we saw there on the front lawn. This is on Steve Bannon's War Room.
This phone call between the President of the United States and Netanyahu.
From what we were told by senior administration officials is, and they said this in diplomatic language on background, that Trump called and relayed his concerns in very strong terms, and that Prime Minister Netanyahu said he understood those concerns. Now, when I spoke to one of my sources, who I'm trying to make sure to protect them, called him a Trump advisor, and said, boy, it sounded like Bibi got his asshole ripped by Donald Trump. They said, yeah, pretty much. Now, you saw, and you've seen Donald Trump angry. You've been in private rooms with him. You know what that's like. So I would imagine that ride on that Marine One helicopter after Trump departed the White House was probably one of those situations where aides are just going to stay away from the president and make sure he cools off, because his blood was up. Period.
You've been on this beat for a long time. I've never seen the president that mad. I've never seen that man to drop an F-bomb like that. I've never seen the way he's addressing Netanyahu. He's furious because he's put it all on the line. He had to work with Qatar. This was to save Israel. Netanyahu jeopardized Israel and the people of Israel. They're the ones taking the big incomings tomorrow, and the dome ain't working. I mean, they're running out of ammo. I'm not saying it's not working. They just got too many ballistic missiles coming at them. President Trump did that for him and his government, and now they're trying to get in every lick they can possibly get, and Trump's not going to have it. He doesn't play that way. He says, his big thing is no games.
I wonder, Jim, how like-minded Trump and Netanyahu are. If they can continue this stance, it sounds like there's quite a bit of rumbling going on.
I think that's true, and I think it's probably genuine coming from Trump on a personal level. Right? I guess the question, I think so. I think the question I have is, how much is that really worth? In other words, in terms of the United States commitment to Israel and the political establishment in Washington, Trump can get angry, he can thrash, he can yell at Netanyahu. Can he afford to back off of American support for Israel? No, he cannot. That's an absolute imperative coming from Washington, that even he as president has very little ability to change if he knows what's good for him on any number of levels. And so I think he can make all sorts of noise. He can get angry. He can yell at Netanyahu. But when push comes to shove, he cannot afford to not supply Israel with weapons. He cannot even afford, I think, when push comes to shove, if there's another round, another confrontation with the Iranians, to back the Israelis up militarily if that's what they require.
Yeah, I think it looks to me like it's getting under his Trump. It's getting under his skin a little bit.
Well, and maybe that's partly a frustration of the fact that he knows, in a sense, that he's kind of trapped, that if things get dicey again for Israel, he's going to have to perform and maybe get himself into a war he would rather not get into, because what's it going to do to his domestic agenda? If oil goes through the roof, the price of oil goes through the roof, if half of his mega base deserts him because we're in a new war and so forth, he's got to worry about those things. But even if he's worried about them, he may not be able to avoid stepping over that line.
Right. And I mean, as he recognizes, as you just described, his whole legacy is at stake here. And I think part of it is also what's going on with what the narrative that they're trying to put out, and not only him, but his administration. Here is J.D. Vance just last night, right after the announcement of this ceasefire.
what we destroyed is their ability to enrich uranium. If they have 60% enriched uranium, but they don't have the ability to enrich it to 90%, and further, they don't have the ability to convert that to a nuclear weapon, that is mission success. That is the obliteration of their nuclear program, which is why the president, I think, rightly is using that term.
Jim, I think that's going to be a problem going forward. Their confidence of what they've accomplished, when there's very little to no proof of it, they're great at saying it all the time and consistently through the entire administration, the success of it all. But my gosh, without having any verifiable evidence to that, they're gonna end up naked at the end of the day. Not at the end of the day, probably, you know, in months to come.
Yeah. I mean, look, by all indications, what the vice president said is just bunk. We did not destroy their nuclear capability. What the Iranians have essentially invited us in to bomb those empty facilities if they thought it was actually going to destroy their nuclear program. You know, where's the nuclear material that they've already amassed? We have no indication of that.
Nobody knows.
By all the indications, the effect is going to be the exact opposite. You know, again, if you're in the Iranians' position and you say, well, we have two paths in front of us. We can give up our nuclear program and end up like Libya, or we can double down on our nuclear program and maybe now knuckle down and say, hey, I guess we have no choice but to build ourselves a bomb and end up like North Korea. And I think that given those choices, all the indications are now the Iranians are going to pick the second choice. And in fact, we already saw from Foreign Minister Lavrov from Russia, essentially advising the Iranians to say, hey, look, these IAEA inspections, they're not doing you any good. Obviously, Israel has no IAEA inspections, even though we all know they have nuclear weapons. So I think that not only is the Iranian nuclear program not going away, has not been destroyed, I think it's actually going to intensify, and maybe they will move now towards building a nuclear weapon. I think it might have been counterproductive on that front.
Well, talk about the incentive they now have to go that route. You know, what incentive is it for them not to go that route, right?
Well, the only incentive not to go that route is if I suppose that the United States and Israel thought that they had made the decision to go forward, we might go forward ourselves with the zero option, which is even then to use nuclear weapons to destroy them before they can make one of their own. That's a real danger for them, it seems to me. But if they do move forward and are able to acquire a nuclear weapon, then that creates the same balance of terror that I alluded to earlier with respect to Israel, that the Iranians can't push the Israelis too far because they know they would be suffered the possibility of being struck with nuclear weapons. You know, Israel could find itself in the same position if the Iranians acquired nuclear weapons, which is exactly what they say they don't want to be risking. Right. So, as I say, I think this may have been totally counterproductive from that point of view.
Yeah. So there's that part of the narrative that they're pushing relentlessly, and then here's another part that Vance introduced last night.
The president's been extremely clear about America's national objective here. It is to create a world where Iran cannot build a nuclear weapon. We, of course, destroyed the nuclear program that they had, and the president told the entire team, we're going to work to make sure that they don't try to rebuild that nuclear capability in the future. For Israel, think about this. They've accomplished an important military objective. They've helped us destroy the Iranian nuclear program. They've also destroyed the conventional missile capability of Iran that threatened the country of Israel. For the Iranians, I think this is a new opportunity to actually pursue the path of peace. As I said yesterday, what the Iranians have showed through their support of terror networks, through their now failed effort to build a nuclear weapon, is that they're just not very good at war. And I actually think when we look back, we will say the 12-day war was an important reset moment for the entire region.
You ready to say reset? This reminds me when Bush was on the USS Abraham Lincoln in 2003. Behind mission accomplished, and now we've got J.D. Vance saying this is the 12-day war, and now we have a reset for the Middle East.
Respectfully, I don't think anything the vice president said is true. We haven't destroyed their nuclear program, as far as I can tell.
He said two things. They even wrote it down. He says they've eliminated it, and they cannot build. Both those things.
Yeah. As far as I know, that is not true, and that's not true about their missile capabilities either. And it avoids the question of what was the larger goal here. It was not the nuclear program. Look, I'll be honest with you. I don't think the nukes are really at the root of this at all. I think that's like Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. It's a pretext for regime change. What they're hoping for, and I don't think it's a realistic hope at this point, is that the soft liners, if you will, the more conciliatory elements in Tehran around President Pezeshkian would say, well, see, now we have a real chance to come to an agreement with the Americans and get out from under the sanctions if we just meet their terms. Well, like I said, that's the path to Libya and how that worked out for Colonel Gaddafi. I don't think the Iranians will go down that road, and that's why I think this 12-day war isn't. I think that it's going to, however long this truce turns out to be, it's going to come back. And I think we're going to be involved in it more than most Americans would like.
What do you think the Iranians are, at this moment in time, they're playing it pretty well.
I think they're going to play it cool. I think they will go along with the ceasefire for the time being, depending on what Israel does. But I think Israel is on a short fuse here too. If they can rebuild some of their air defenses, they've got to be thinking very hard how to get us back into this war directly and to take care of regime change in Tehran. This fluff, this pretense about the nuclear program that's not mission accomplishment in reality as much as everybody's pretending it is right now.
Yeah, no kidding. Let me play one more thing from J.D. Vance, who gives us a little bit of, not instruction, but I guess encouragement.
I think he's threaded the needle quite well here. We had a very particular objective. It was profound and difficult to accomplish.
Do you think
the elimination of the Iranian nuclear program, and I think the president successfully did that. Brett, they were very close to a nuclear weapon. And what I'd encourage my fellow Americans to think about here is that a week ago, the Iranians were quite close to achieving a nuclear weapon. Now they cannot build a nuclear weapon. We have destroyed the Iranian nuclear program. 0 Americans have died. That's an amazing, amazing thing. Americans, whether Democrats or Republicans, we should be celebrating that.
Jim, I'm elated that no one has died in that process over the weekend. No Americans had died over that process. Yeah. But what troubles me the most, and it's really getting glossed over now, is how Trump is not listening to his intelligence that he surrounded himself with. For him to say that Tulsi Gabbard doesn't know what she's talking about, that she was wrong, and he's got other sources, this is so troubling to me. And we still don't know who his sources are. Yeah. We're left only to wonder who's in his ear.
Well, and that gets back to the question you asked earlier in terms of how much of a string is Trump on when it comes to Netanyahu. I don't know how much of his information is deriving from Israeli sources rather than the American intelligence community, just like I don't know how much of Washington's information about Ukraine is coming from Ukrainian sources rather than from our own intelligence.
And Jim, what would make it superior?
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, what would make it superior? What would their intel, why would it be superior to how many agencies?
It wouldn't be. It would be self-interested, of course. They would, look, let's face it, a lot of intelligence is spun. You mentioned Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, she did back off a little bit from her earlier statement, and some people said she flip-flopped, or maybe she was just sort of moderating her statement and so forth. But I think the bottom line is what the vice president said, again, respectfully, was bass-ackwards. I mean, they were not close, as far as we can tell, to building a nuclear weapon, but we have not destroyed their nuclear program. I think the reverse is true now, is that having not destroyed their nuclear program, they are going to be working towards the possibility of a nuclear bomb. I think we've accomplished the exact opposite.
Jim, I agree. That's what I was saying earlier, that I think they're even more determined now. There's no reason for them to back off or to slow it down or for any other reason. They're not going to capitulate in the face of the force that's been shown. And again, I guess I just want to circle back to the fact that we've got a president that has how many agencies doing surveillance for him and trying to gather intel for him, and it's not sufficient. How many people?
Yeah, and it's, I guess, technically speaking, if you listen to Larry Johnson and other people, there are 4 or 5 agencies that are direct intelligence collectors, although there are technically 17 or 18 agencies that are part of the intelligence community under the DNI. But the fact is, yeah, you've got some good information coming in from there. Unfortunately, as is always the case, it's going to get massaged as it comes up the line in terms of what actually is presented to the political decision makers. And that's where the disconnect likely is. Again, according to some accounts, the people who really have Trump's ear are this General Kurilla, who is very, very close to the Israelis, and also to Radcliffe over at CIA, who is at least going to be on the same page as the Israelis. As far as the DNI, as far as Tulsi Gabbard, I don't know what role she's playing right now in the day-to-day briefing of the president and ensuring that he gets something different from what the Israelis want him to hear.
It almost looks to me like she's her role now is to rubber stamp.
Look, you don't get very far in politics in Washington if you're going to fall on your sword over the first disagreement. So I'm willing to cut her some slack that she's trying to manage whatever influence she has in the administration, and that involves, I hate to say it, some compromises along the way. That's just the nature of life in Washington. So I'm not willing to say, oh, well, she just flip-flopped and she's just, a nobody now. Maybe she still feels she can do some good there, but how much influence she's actually having and to what end, I can't really say.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I hear you on that, and that's a fair assessment, very much so. Well, Jim, love having you on. Love hearing your take on things, and you're a breath of fresh air. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Gary. Really appreciate it, and keep up the good work. You and Daniel are doing the Lord's work here, and I know a lot of people, especially in the MAGA movement, have been, which is now split now, unfortunately, are throwing rocks against some people, against Daniel Davis, against Marjorie Taylor Greene, against Ron Paul, against all sorts of people, I think you've got to start with slings and arrows, and there are a lot of people who want to believe that every word that comes out of Trump's mouth is true. And look, I supported him. I still support him. I've supported him for 3 elections, but I'm not a mindless supporter who's going to say whenever he strays from what he promised, I'm going to say, well, the president's always right. That doesn't get us anywhere good. I think that his supporters need to be pressing him to say, stick with what you promised. America first, not Israel first, not any other country first, but America first. And that's what we got to keep focused on.
Oh, that's a great rap, man. Jim, I love that. Excellent. All right, brother, we'll see you soon.
Yes, sir.
And everybody, we'll see you soon, too. We're so grateful that you came here. As remember, just staying unintimidated and uncompromised.